On the night of our 7th anniversary, I was pulled into an emergency C-section. Before I could scrub in, my director caught my arm. Jana, the woman on that table is under the protection of a man powerful enough to ruin this hospital by morning. Do not make a mistake. I glanced at the patient chart and frowned. Men in our world, including Enzo, were all obsessed with their wives. How could a man like that possibly have another woman he cherished? The surgery went well. Clean incision, clean closure, no complications. I had barely exhaled in relief when a swarm of men in black dragged me to my knees outside the recovery room and forced me to my knees outside a private recovery suite. Our daughter is beautiful. I heard my husband's voice through the glass, and something inside me shattered on the spot. Rosa smiled weakly from the hospital bed. Best 3rd anniversary gift you ever gave me. 3rd anniversary. That was the moment the rest of the lies fell into place. Every late night at the office, every dinner he canceled, every time he came home after midnight and told me family business had run long. Cold marble pressed into my knees outside Rosa's room, but it was the ache in my chest that nearly broke me. I stared through the glass and forgot how to breathe. Enzo sat at Rosa's bedside, one hand on the baby, the other brushing her hair back from her face. By the time the surgery ended, I was running on nothing. I had been on my feet for hours when the emergency C-section call came in. Before I could scrub in, my director caught my arm. Jana, the woman on the under the protection of a man powerful enough to ruin this hose by morning. Do not make a mistake. I glanced at the patient chart and frowned. Men in our world, especially men like Enzo, were obsessed with their wives. How could a man like that possibly have another woman he cherished? The surgery went well. I had barely exhaled in relief when a swarm of men in black dragged me to my knees outside the recovery suite. Then Enzo's voice came from inside, and the blood in my body turned cold. My wife says you hurt her on purpose during surgery. Kneel there all night and apologize. His wife? He said it so easily. Not me, Rosa. I stared through the glass at the man had been married to for 7 years. The man who had sworn there had never been anyone but me. Then Rosa's voice pulled me straight into another memory. It was Enzo's birthday. I had traded shifts so I could surprise him with a cake. I opened the bedroom door and found him naked in our bed with a woman I had never seen before. I threw the cake at them before either of them could speak. Enzo dropped to his knees so fast the sound cracked through the room. The girl followed right after him. He looked up at me with bloodshot eyes and grabbed my wrist with both hands. Jana, listen to me. I was set up. One of the guys drugged my drink. She was sent to my room. I thought it was you. The girl was shaking so hard she could barely speak. She swore she had needed money and had put something in his drink herself. Before dawn, Enzo had her sent away. Then he tore through his own men, smashed half his study. His mother came to see me and cried at my kitchen table. Jana, please. He loves you. If you leave him, he will lose his mind. I locked myself in my room for 3 days. Then I opened the door and gave him one last chance. I told him if there was ever a next time, I would leave so completely, he would never find me again. At dawn, the guards finally let me stand. My director did not even look me in the eye when she told me to clear out my office. No one in the city crossed a Moretti and kept their job. I drove home in silence. Over the fireplace hung our wedding portrait. In it, Enzo looked at me with the devotion I had believed in for 7 years. I sat on the floor beneath that portrait until my throat burned raw. When the sun came up, I looked at his face one last time and said, I'm done. I packed one suitcase and sat in the dark until evening. I called Enzo again and again, because some part of me still wanted the truth from his mouth. I wanted to know how a man could kiss his wife goodnight and then walk into another woman's bed. All I got back was one cold line. It was close to midnight when I heard the lock turn. Enzo stepped inside, saw my red eyes, and went still for half a second. Then he crossed the room fast, pulled me into his arms, and touched my hands with a frown. You're freezing. How many times have I told you not to wait up for me? He wrapped me in the blanket and climbed in behind me, trying to warm me with his body. Years ago, before he took over the Moretti family, someone inside the syndicate tried to bury him. Men came after us night after night. There were engines outside the house at all hours, footsteps in alleys, gunshots too close to the walls. I almost never slept. Enzo held me through every nightmare and swore no one would ever touch me while he was alive. We live in a guarded townhouse now. He runs half the city. No one hunts us anymore. So why did my heart feel colder than it had back then? I opened my mouth to ask him when he had started lying to me. Then I caught the scent on his shirt. Warm milk. Baby powder. My stomach turned so hard I shoved him off me and ran for the bathroom. By the time Enzo reached me, I was bent over the sink, shaking. He rubbed my back and called our family doctor. My wife is sick. Be here in 5 minutes. I pressed my palm to my lower stomach and prayed for one thing only. Please do not let there be a child. The doctor arrived within minutes and checked me over, then held out a pregnancy test. Have you had nausea? Trouble eating? It may be early. Enzo's whole face changed. He took my hand and brought me into the bathroom himself. Jana, he said, already smiling, already breathless. Are we finally having a baby? My fingers would not stop trembling. 3 minutes later, the second line appeared. Enzo stared at them, then at me. His eyes filled first. We're having a baby, he whispered. He sent the doctor out for vitamins, supplements, anything I might need. He sat at the edge of the bed reading pregnancy care guides like they were sacred texts. I watched him and could not understand why this child had come now of all times. Years ago, I got caught in crossfire during a war between two crews, fighting over Moretti territory. I threw myself over Enzo before the second round hit. I woke up in a hospital bed with stitches in my side and blood all over the sheets. That was how we lost our first baby. Afterward, the doctors told me getting pregnant again might not happen easily. I spent 5 years on medications, injections, appointments, and hope that kept ending in silence. Nothing happened. Then I caught my husband with the woman he had never truly left. And suddenly there was a child. I looked at Enzo and held on to the last shred of hope I had left. If he told me the truth now, maybe I could still force myself to believe there was something worth saving. Enzo, is there something you need to tell me? His phone rang before he could answer. He glanced at the screen, and that single look told me more than any confession could have. He turned back to me, bent down, and kissed my forehead. Something came up. I need to handle it. I caught his hand before he could pull away. Give me 3 minutes. The phone kept ringing. He gave me that familiar helpless smile, the one that used to work on me every time. We'll talk when I get back. Tomorrow is yours, all day. Half an hour after he left, a message came from an unknown number. The photo showed the man who had just told me he was going to work, with his mouth on roses, their child smiling in her arms. Some questions answer themselves. At least Enzo had always been generous. The accounts in my name held more money than I could spend in one lifetime. I could leave, raise this baby alone, and never ask him for a cent. I rested my hand over my stomach and cried quietly. It's you and me now, I whispered. There were no seats left on the last flight out that night. I bought one for Los Angeles the next evening and spent the hours in between trying not to look at my phone. All night, a new photo arrived every 10 minutes. Enzo had bought Rosa a house in the same gated neighborhood where I lived. In one photo, he was standing behind her with his hand over hers, while she painted a wooden plaque for the nursery. Happy family of 3. The words blurred in front of me. Pain tightened low in my belly. My hand went slack, and the phone slipped from my fingers, hitting the floor hard enough to crack the screen. When it lit up again, the wallpaper showed a photo of Enzo kissing me on the night we first fell in love. I smashed the phone against the floor. Then I tore every framed picture off the wall. There were more than 1,000 of them in this house. In every single one, Enzo had looked at the camera and said, I love you. Lies should have sounded uglier than that. By sunrise, I had cut up every photo of us, thrown out the pottery mugs we made together, taken off my wedding ring, and sold every piece of jewelry he had ever bought me. By the time I was done, the room looked stripped clean, like no marriage had ever lived inside it. That was when Enzo came home. His hands were full of shopping bags. He stepped inside, saw the empty wall over the fireplace, and stopped. Jana, where's our wedding portrait? I looked him in the eye and said, the frame cracked. I sent it out to be fixed. For the rest of the day, he played the role perfectly. He turned off his phone and he cooked for me. He searched pregnancy recipes and made soup in our kitchen with his sleeves rolled up, acting like a man who had nowhere else to be. Just after 6, My car service alert flashed across my phone. It was time to leave. Then the doorbell rang. Enzo glanced toward the foyer and smiled. That should be the flowers. He headed for the door, with the spatula still in his hand. But the second he opened it, all the color drained from his face. The spatula slipped from his fingers and hit the tile with a sharp crack. He did not even bother taking off his apron before snatching up his keys and heading back out. Enzo, he was already moving. What happened? He gave me nothing but a clipped, "Stay inside," before the door slammed behind him. I did not need an answer. The panic on his face told me it was Rosa, and once again, he ran to her without looking back. I took my suitcase and walked out to the street to hail a car before the house swallowed me whole. Then I heard the low growl of an engine. A black unmarked car rolled to a stop right in front of me. I turned and bolted on instinct, but I barely got moving before a hand sealed over my mouth and nose. Darkness rushed in so fast my knees gave out beneath me. When I regained consciousness, I was crammed inside a burlap sack. Nearby, a woman was crying in that soft, sugary voice I had learned to hate. "Enzo, my incision hurts so bad, it's infected. What if it leaves a scar?" Then I heard his voice, cold, flat, nothing like the man who had held me the night before. "Is this the butcher?" Every muscle in my body locked. I forced air into my lungs and dragged one word out through the cloth. "Enzo, it's me." I said his name, but it came out wet and slurred inside the sack. Nobody heard me, or nobody wanted to. The burlap scraped against my face when I tried to lift my head. Through the weave, I could only make out fragments. Dark shoes crossing the floor, the hem of Rosa's robe, men standing back and waiting for orders. Then her heel came down on my right hand. I heard the crack before the pain caught up with it. It started in my fingers and tore all the way up my arm. I jerked against the ropes and tasted blood where I bit through my lip. "These are the hands that touched me?" Rosa asked. Her voice shook in all the right places. "If she can't even close a wound properly, what use are they?" I tried to curl around the pain, but there was nowhere to go. My wrists were tied behind me, my knees pinned under me. My shoulder ground into the concrete. I could smell antiseptic, damp canvas, and the sweet perfume Rosa always wore when she wanted to look helpless. Those hands had been my whole life. I had worked too hard for them. There had been training, fellowship, overnight shifts that bled into mornings, and practice until my fingers trembled so badly I could barely hold a scalpel. Enzo had seen every part of it. He used to sit across from me at the kitchen table and rub my wrists while I studied my cases. When the cramps go bad, he would lift my hands and kiss my knuckles, telling me they were worth more than anything he could buy me. Now, Rosa was grinding her heel into that same hand, while he stood close enough to stop her. "Enzo." I tried again. He didn't answer. Rosa made a soft, pained sound, and he was at her side at once. "Easy," he murmured. "Don't upset yourself. You'll tear your stitches." A cold blade pressed into my palm. I never saw who held it. I only felt the point break skin, then go deeper. The scream tore out of me before I could swallow it. Rosa drew in a breath that sounded pleased. "My incision still hurts," she said. "I can't even sit up without feeling it." Enzo turned to the men. Whatever softness had been in his voice for her was gone by the time he spoke to them. "Then make her understand what pain feels like." The first kick landed in my ribs. The second caught my side. By the time the third hit my stomach, instinct took over, and I curled around the baby, trying to protect what I could not protect from the truth. Boots kept coming. They hit my hip, my back, then my lower stomach. Each blow left me breathless. I curled tighter, but it made no difference. I could not stop thinking about the first child we lost, about the blood on the asphalt that night, about the way Enzo had held me afterward and sworn nothing would ever touch me again. That promise should have died years ago. I had simply been too stupid to bury it. Warmth spread between my thighs. At first, I thought I had lost control of my body. Then I smelled blood. One of the guards stepped back. "Boss, she's bleeding." Enzo didn't even look at me. "My wife is in pain," he said. "A little blood doesn't settle the score." Rosa lowered herself into a chair with great care, one hand resting over the blanket around her waist. She looked toward me with eyes still bright from tears. "I still don't feel better," she whispered. That was enough. The next kick came down hard across my low abdomen. I gasped and went cold. Something inside me gave way all at once. Blood ran faster now, soaking through my clothes, through the canvas, and onto the floor beneath me. Somewhere nearby, a man cursed under his breath. Another said, "We should stop." Enzo laughed once, low and cruel. "Since when do you take orders from anyone but me?" I let my head fall to the floor. It would have been easier to pass out, easier not to hear Rosa breathing softly in the room. and not to know that the man who once knelt outside an operating room and begged for my life was the same man now standing over me, while his people beat me to death. If I died there, I thought, maybe the baby and I would not have to be afraid anymore. Then the hospital director arrived. I heard him before. I saw him, shoes slipping on blood, breath ripping in and out of his chest. Then the sound of a man dropping to his knees. Don Moretti, please, he said. Please stop this. Dr. Romano is the best obstetric surgeon in the hospital. There isn't another doctor in this city I would trust more with a delivery like Mrs. Moretti's. The room went still. It took Enzo a second too long. Doctor, not butcher, not some nameless woman Rosa had dragged in to punish. A doctor. My doctor. I heard him shove someone out of the way before his voice cut across the room. What did you say? The director swallowed hard. Dr. Gianna Romano. She performed the C-section. She is the best surgeon we have. Then he was in front of me. The sack tore open. Hands fumbled at the ropes. The cloth was yanked off my head so roughly it burned my skin. My vision doubled, but I still saw his face. For the first time that night, Enzo looked afraid. Jesus Christ, he said. I forced my eyes open and smiled at him with what was left of my mouth. Congratulations, Enzo, I whispered. You just killed your own child. After that, everything lost its edges. There were white lights overhead, voices crossing over one another, the hard chill of a table beneath my back, and pain that came in violent waves while people pressed on my body and shouted for blood. The monitors would not stop screaming. Someone said my pressure was dropping. Someone else told them to prep the or again. I remember Enzo's voice somewhere beyond the noise, raw and breaking in ways I had never heard before. But by then he no longer belonged to me. I let the sound pass through me without reaching for it. At some point, the pain changed. It moved beyond screaming and became something thinner, emptier, more final. In that strange quiet, I saw a little girl. She could not have been more than 3 or 4. Dark curls, bare feet. She stood a few steps away in all that white light and looked at me with Enzo's eyes. Mom, she said. I reached for her at once, but my arms felt heavy and slow. She smiled at me, sad and sweet, and already leaving. I can't stay. When I woke, the room was dim and so quiet it took me a moment to understand I was still alive. The first thing I felt was the ache. It sat deep in my body, low and unbearable, joined by sharper pain in my ribs, my hand, my shoulder, and my face. The second thing I felt was absence. I knew before anyone told me. My palm moved to my stomach. It was flat again beneath the blanket. Something caught in my throat, too raw to be a sob, and too broken to pass for breath. When I turned my head, Enzo was there. He looked worse than I felt. Dark stubble shadowed his jaw. His shirt was still stained from the night before, though someone had thrown a coat over it. There were crescents of dried blood beneath his nails. He must have fallen asleep in the chair, but at some point he had slid from it to his knees. That was where he still was when I woke up. Jana, he said, and the way he said my name almost made me hate him more. I turned my face away. The movement pulled at the stitches in my abdomen, and pain flashed through me so sharply. I sucked in a breath. Enzo dropped to his knees before I could steady myself. He did not touch me at first. He only knelt there with both hands open on his thighs, waiting for something I would never give him. I'm sorry, he said. I know it doesn't matter. I know it changes nothing, but I'm sorry. I closed my eyes. That was how he always came back to me, on his knees, looking ruined enough to wake every soft thing I had ever felt for him. Once, that would have worked. Once, seeing him like this would have split me open. I would have remembered the boy who slept on concrete outside my bedroom door. The man who begged doctors not to let me die after the alley shooting. The husband who used to kiss my hands and call them his good luck. But our child was gone. Something vital had gone with her. Enzo must have seen it in my face, because his voice turned rougher. Say whatever you want. Hate me. Curse me. Just don't shut me out. I still said nothing. After a while he tried to reach for my hand. The moment he moved, I recoiled. Pain ripped through me. It did not matter. I kept moving until my shoulder nearly slipped off the edge of the mattress. That was the only thing that stopped him. He froze where he was, his hand hanging in the air, and I watched the realization settle over his face. He froze at once. From that point on, he never left the room. I learned that by opening my eyes at odd hours and always finding him in the same place. Sometimes he sat beside the bed reading reports he clearly wasn't seeing. Sometimes he stood by the window with a cigarette he never lit. Sometimes he watched me breathe because he believed I might disappear between one breath and the next. He spoke rarely. When he did, it was to ask whether I needed water, whether the pain medication was helping, whether he could call the nurse. I answered no one, not even the nurses. Speaking felt dangerous. If I started, I might say the baby's name. And then I would have to admit she had never been given the chance to have one. Toward evening, his assistant arrived with a thick file tucked under one arm. He stopped just inside the door when he saw me awake and lowered his voice at once. Boss, the report you asked for. Enzo looked at me first, as though even standing might count as abandonment. Then he rose and stepped into the hall. I heard very little through the closed door, only fragments. Rose's name, the hospital, messages, then a long silence. When Enzo came back in, the color had drained from his face. He stood by the foot of my bed with the file open in his hands and stared at the pages without moving. Whatever he had just learned, it was bad enough to shake even him. For a second, I almost wanted to know. Then I remembered the weight that was no longer inside me and turned my face to the wall. Whatever was in that file could not bring my daughter back. The report left very little room for lies. Rosa had not ended up at Stevie Vincent's by chance. She had chosen the hospital weeks in advance and made sure Jana would be on call if her labor turned complicated. There were transfers to private staff, messages to the scheduling office, and screenshots of burner number texts sent after Enzo left. Jana alone with a positive pregnancy test and went straight back to Rosa's bed. Enzo read every line standing outside Gianna's room with one hand braced against the wall. The pictures were bad enough. Rosa in his bed. Rosa in the apartment he had bought, inside the same gated neighborhood where Jana lived. Rosa, holding their daughter while taunting the woman who still wore his ring. But the messages were worse. Did he ever kiss you like this after he came back from me? You're still calling yourself his wife? That's embarrassing. When he gets tired of guilty sex, he comes where he actually wants to be. He had spent 4 years thinking he was managing 2 lives. In reality, Rosa had been dragging the filth of one straight through the center of the other, and Jana had been forced to stand in it without him even noticing. That was when it all fell into place. The empty spaces in the house, the missing jewelry, the wedding portrait gone from the wall, the way Jana had looked at him that day, as if he were already a stranger. She had known the truth, and he had still stood there and lied to her before leaving. The thought made his stomach turn. The assistant waited until Enzo finished reading. Then he handed him Rosa's medical report. The incision was healing normally. The doctor she later accused of neglect had noted mild inflammation and ordinary pain, nothing more. Rosa had started exaggerating the moment she realized Jana had survived the surgery and gone home alive. She had wanted one more scene, one more chance to humiliate her. Enzo closed the file and said, "Bring her here. Bring the baby, and bring her phone." Rosa arrived less than an hour later, with their daughter in her arms and tears already on her face. She came in dressed for a quiet afternoon, not a reckoning. And the sight of Enzo waiting for her outside Gianna's room seemed to reassure her at first. "How is Jana?" she asked softly. "This is all my fault. If I hadn't been in pain, none of this would have happened." Enzo said nothing. Rosa took a cautious step toward him. "I never wanted trouble. I told you that. I only ever wanted a little time." She had always known how to speak to him. She knew when to lower her voice, when to look frightened, when to make herself seem so dependent that even cruelty would feel like abandonment. For 4 years, that had been enough. Today it wasn't. The baby fussed in her arms. Rosa pinched the child's arm just out of sight, and the little girl began to cry at once. Enzo caught it. That was the moment the last of his patience left him. "Give me the baby," he said. Rosa hesitated. He stepped forward, took the child himself, and passed her to the assistant. Then he held onto his hand. "Your phone, Enzo, phone." Something in his voice made her obey. She fumbled it out of her pocket and placed it in his palm. He unlocked it with her face before she understood what he was doing. Then he opened the message thread. The corridor went quiet. Even Rosa stopped trying to breathe prettily. He scrolled once, twice, a dozen times. Every taunt, every photo, every line she had sent Jana while lying in the bed, he paid for. When he finally looked up, there was no confusion left in him. "How long did you plan to keep acting?" he asked. Rosa's lips parted. "Those messages weren't." He dropped the phone at her feet. "Do not lie to me again." Whatever fear had been holding Rosa together finally broke. She sank onto the sofa and stared up at him through wet lashes, anger burning straight through the tears. "Then what did you want from me? To stay in the dark forever? To smile when you came to my bed and disappear when you went back to her? I gave you a daughter. I gave you years. Why does she get to stand beside you while I'm handed whatever scraps you leave behind?" Enzo didn't raise his voice. He did not need to. "You knew exactly what you were to me." "No." Rosa shot back. "I knew what you told me to be. There is a difference." She stood, all softness gone. "I'm younger than she is. I gave you a child. I stayed quiet when you asked. I stayed in the shadows while she wore your ring. Tell me why she gets everything and I get nothing." "Because she is my wife," Enzo said. And what was I to you? He looked at her without a flicker of warmth. A place I went when I wanted peace, not a life. The words hit hard enough to drain what little color Rosa had left. So that was all I was? She asked. Yes. For one dangerous second it looked as though she might throw herself at him. Instead, she lunged for the baby in the assistant's arms. The assistant turned just in time, taking the impact on his shoulder. But the child started wailing so hard the sound filled the corridor. Enzo crossed the distance between them into strides and slapped Rosa hard enough to split her lip. You don't touch her, he said. Rosa pressed a hand to her mouth and stared at the blood on her fingers. Then she started crying for real. Not because she was hurt, because she had finally understood the shape of her defeat. I loved you, she said. That was your mistake. He caught her by the arm before she could answer and dragged her toward Gianna's room. You're going to apologize. And if she refuses to forgive you, you'll thank God that's all she refuses. Rosa dug in her heels. I will never apologize to her. She's the one who stood where I should have stood. She's the one who had to die for you to see me. Enzo went still. Say that again. She did. She said Gianna had taken the life that should have been hers. Said Gianna should have died years ago. Said the baby's death was justice. The longer Rosa went on, the quieter Enzo became. And that silence chilled the room far more than shouting ever could. When her voice finally gave out, he shoved open the door to Gianna's room and stopped short. The bed was empty. The blankets had been thrown back. The four-line hung loose from the stand, and in the middle of the mattress lay a single sheet of paper. He let go of Rosa so suddenly she stumbled into the wall, crossing the room into strides. He snatched up the page and saw Gianna's name at the bottom, written in a hand made unsteady by pain. Divorce papers. He tore them once, then again, and turned on his assistant. Pull every camera in this hospital. Corridors, stairwells, service exits, loading docks. I want her found. They searched for 3 hours and found nothing. One of the guards had taken a bribe and deleted part of the footage, but the assistant managed to recover it frame by frame. On the screen, Gianna moved through the room barefoot and weak, one hand braced against the wall, the other wrapped around her middle. When she reached the window, she pushed it open and climbed onto the ledge. Enzo stopped the video. His hand closed so tightly around the remote his knuckles turned white. Keep playing. The footage rolled on. Gianna stood there for several long seconds, swaying a little as she looked down. Then the door opened, and a boy, maybe 9 years old, leaned his head into the room. Miss? He asked. Can you help me find my dad? Gianna turned. Even through the grainy hospital feed, the change in her was plain. It was not hope. And it was not relief. It was instinct. She stepped down from the ledge because there was a child in front of her, and she would not let him be the one to see her die. The boy came in with a rubber ball tucked under one arm, speaking fast in the brave little voice children use when they are afraid. The men outside your room are scary. I threw my ball down the stairs, and they all ran after it. If you need to leave, now's the chance. Gianna lowered herself in front of him with obvious effort and asked, if I help you find your father, will you help me get out of here? He nodded at once. My dad's nice. He'll help you. In the next clip, Gianna was carrying him down the service stairs, one hand on the rail and the other holding him close. A nurse passed them without a second glance. The boy's father met them in the underground garage, opened the back door of a black SUV, and a moment later, the car was gone. That was the end of the footage. Enzo hurled the remote so hard it shattered against the wall. He grabbed one of the guards by the collar and slammed him into the nearest cabinet hard enough to split the man's brow. Blood ran down his face. Enzo did not even seem to notice. I told you never to leave her alone, he said through his teeth. Not for a second. No one answered. No one could. He shoved the guard away and stood there in the wrecked room, breathing hard, already understanding what Gianna had known the moment she signed those papers. If she had made it out alive, she was never coming back. The boy's name was Noah Sinclair. His father was Damien Sinclair, a widower with old money, discreet power, and the kind of presence that made armed men step aside without being told. He did not ask me questions the night he took me from the hospital. He looked at the blood on my clothes, at the child tucked against my shoulder, at the way I was standing, only because I refused to collapse in front of a stranger. And he simply said, get in. He put me in a house on the coast. 2 days later, far enough from New York that even Enzo's reach would have to stretch to find me. New documents appeared. A doctor came and went without speaking my name out loud. Lawyers signed papers I never saw. By the end of the month, Gianna Romano had vanished from every place that mattered. Noah was the only person who acted as though none of that were strange. He attached himself to me with the shameless certainty lonely children have. At first, I thought it was gratitude because I had helped him in the hospital. Later, I understood it had very little to do with that. He had seen something in me that he recognized before. I had the strength to name it in myself. He saved me in small ways. He never let me shut myself away for long. If I stayed inside all day, he would come find me and coax me out with him. To the cliffs, to the market, or to the church at the end of the road, where the old women lit candles and minded their own sorrow instead of asking about mine. Sometimes he asked me to read to him when I stopped in the middle of a page because I could not get past a line about mothers. He always pretended not to notice. One afternoon he begged me to take him to the big field behind the house so he could fly a kite. The wind was strong enough to pull the line tight and steady in his hands. He ran laughing across the grass while I followed more slowly, watching the bright triangle climb higher into the clean blue sky. When it started to pull too hard, I reached for the spool. "Wait," Noah said. He looked up at the kite, then at me. "Let's let it go." "Why?" He shrugged with the solemn wisdom children sometimes have by accident. "Because it wants to fly higher than we can hold it." I stood there with the wind in my hair and felt something give way inside me. I had been clutching pain so tightly I had mistaken it for loyalty. To my marriage, to the daughter I lost, to the version of myself who had died on that hospital floor and somehow kept breathing. Noah pulled a small pair of scissors from his pocket and held them out. "You do it," he said. My hand shook when I took them. Then I cut the string. The kite jumped once, caught the wind, and sailed free. I watched it until it was only a scrap of color against the sky. For the first time in months, my chest loosened enough for a full breath. After that, healing came in pieces I could keep. In time, I began sleeping through the night again. I stopped waking with my palm pressed to my stomach, caught between memory and habit. I returned to the church and lit a candle for the daughter I never held, asking for nothing except that wherever she had gone, she had found a gentler life. When Noah realized how much I loved baking, he nagged his father until he found me a place in a pastry course in the city. "Learn everything," he told me with complete seriousness. "Then make me the coolest birthday cake in America." I laughed for the first time in so long it startled both of us. Months passed. Then Damien came home from a trip abroad and saw me properly for the first time. He stood in the doorway of his study and looked at me with the stunned expression of a man who had just seen a ghost in daylight. I followed his gaze to the family photograph on the wall. His late wife had dark hair, soft eyes, and an open smile that hurt to look at. I did not think I looked very much like her. But grief does not need perfect resemblance to startle. "I'm sorry," he said, after a moment. "You caught me off guard." He gestured toward the photograph. Noah's mother, Elena. He was the one who found her after she fell. The rest he told me without drama. Their second child had died. Elena had broken under the weight of it and jumped from the balcony while Noah was still young, enough to think every disaster could have been stopped if an adult had listened sooner. That was why he had gone into my hospital room that day. Not because he was lost, because somewhere inside him he had recognized another woman, standing too close to the edge. By the time Damien finished speaking, my eyes were burning. "He talks about you all the time," he said. "I'm not asking for gratitude. I just want you to know that staying here has mattered to him. It had mattered to me too, more than I knew how to explain." That night Noah was still awake when I walked past his room. He came running out in bare feet and threw himself into my arms so hard the force of it nearly knocked me backward. I held him tightly and pressed my face into his hair. "Thank you," I whispered. He went still. Then I felt his shoulders begin to shake. "If I had held onto my mom's hand," he said, "into my neck, maybe she wouldn't have left." I tightened my arms around him. There are some losses love cannot prevent. I knew that now. But holding him there in the warm hallway light, I knew something else too. Sometimes love arrives later and still saves a life. 3 years passed before Enzo found me. By then, I owned a bakery in Santa Monica with white tile walls, warm bread at dawn, and a front window full of pastries Noah claimed were too pretty to sell. I had married Damien in every way that mattered on paper, and in almost none that belonged to romance. The arrangement had been his idea. Gossip had started once it became clear I was staying in his house and raising his son with him. He came to me one evening with a bottle of wine, a stack of legal documents, and an apology already prepared. "We can make it clean," he said. "No obligations, no pretending in private, just protection." There was money attached to it, more than enough to buy a future. But that was never the real reason I said yes. Safety was. Noah was. A quiet name on a marriage certificate was harder to attack than a woman who had vanished with no shield around her. So I became Mrs. Sinclair to the outside world and built a life inside that name. Enzo found me on Noah's first day at Stede Augustine Prep. I had just watched Noah disappear through the school gates when I heard brakes scream at the intersection. A black car stopped halfway through a red light, and Enzo came around it without bothering to shut the door. He crossed the street between moving traffic with the blind certainty of a man who had already decided being hit would still be a better outcome than letting me walk away again. He looked older, not old but worn. The sharpness was still there, yet grief had taken a bite out of him. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that had not been there before, and something restless in the way he held himself. The mark of a man who had spent 3 years failing to sleep through the night. When he stopped in front of me, he was breathing hard. "Jana," he said, my name the way people say the names of saints and ghosts. I looked at him and felt almost nothing. That surprised me more than his appearance did. I had imagined this moment too many times in the beginning. In some versions, I screamed at him. In others, I slapped him hard enough to leave a mark. Once or twice, I pictured myself smiling while I ruined him with every word I had saved. But standing there in the morning sun, with Noah safe inside the school and Flower still under one fingernail from the croissants I shaped before dawn, I found that rage had already done its work and burned itself out. Enzo followed my line of sight toward the school building. "Who is he?" I let the silence stretch. Then I said, "My son." His face changed at once. "That's impossible, is it? We were apart for 3 years. He can't be." He stopped. He knew he sounded unhinged, but panic was already outrunning reason. "Jana, don't do this." I lifted my left hand. The ring Damien had chosen for the role was elegant and expensive, without being gaudy. The sort of diamond that made people stop asking questions because wealth itself often passed for proof. Enzo stared at it as though it had cut him. "You remarried." "I moved on," I said. He took a step closer, then remembered he had no right. The motion stopped halfway. "I know what I did. I know I killed our child. I've lived with it every day. Just give me one chance to make any part of it right." I almost laughed. "You had your chance." He looked stricken. "Jana." "No," my voice stayed calm. That was the part he had not expected. He still knew how to survive fury. He did not know what to do with finality. "The night I asked you for 3 minutes, I wasn't asking for a miracle. I wasn't even asking you to choose me. I was asking for the truth. If you had told me everything then, I might have still been stupid enough to stay. But you couldn't give me 3 minutes. You lied to my face and ran to her." He lowered his head. The passing parents around us had started to notice. A few slowed down. One mother lingered openly near the gate, pretending to fix her daughter's coat while listening. I refused to become a public spectacle for him. I touched his sleeve once lightly, only long enough to move him out of the center of the sidewalk. He looked up at that tiny contact with naked hope. It lasted less than a second. "Listen to me carefully," I said. "I am not punishing you. I am not trying to make you suffer. I just don't love you anymore. Those are different things." For the first time, I saw the full truth land. His eyes reddened. He swallowed hard enough to hurt. "Without you, I can't. You said that once before." I cut in. "And I believed you. That's on me." The wind lifted a strand of hair across my cheek. I tucked it back and stepped around him. He reached out by reflex, then let his hand fall before it touched me. At the corner, I turned only because some old mercy in me wanted to leave him with clarity instead of hope. "I let go, Enzo," I said. "Do the same." He did not follow. When I looked back one last time, he was still standing in the same place, one hand hanging open at his side, finally understanding that some losses cannot be bought back. After that, he stayed away for a while. Then he began showing up where my life was smallest and most ordinary. He never came inside the bakery. He would stand across the street, with his hands in his coat pockets, while I opened at dawn, or sit in a parked car half a block away near closing time, waiting for a glimpse that was no longer his to ask for. At first, I hated the sight of him there. Later, I stopped feeling much at all. The day it ended was a Thursday in late spring. The bakery had only a handful of custom orders, and I had promised the children at Steedy Martha's home a fresh batch of honey biscuits after lunch. I spent the morning glazing fruit tarts, packaging, cookies, and scolding No over the phone for trying to buy energy drinks on his way home from school. By noon, the kitchen smelled of butter and orange zest, and my apron was dusted white to the elbows. When I locked the front door and carried the boxes out to my car, Enzo was standing on the opposite sidewalk. He did not cross over. He simply watched me load everything into the trunk, then got into his own car and followed at a distance all the way to the orphanage. The children were already waiting by the gate when I arrived. They ran toward me in a bright, noisy pack, calling my name and tugging at my sleeves before I had even set the boxes down. I knelt on the grass to hand out biscuits one by one, while they told me about spelling tests, scraped knees, secret crushes, and a teacher who smelled of mothballs. One of the smallest girls climbed into my lap without asking. Another leaned against my shoulder while I read them a story under the jacaranda tree in the yard. I was halfway through the last page when a boy near the back pointed over my shoulder. "Miss Jana," he whispered loudly, "that man has been staring at you forever." I turned. Enzo was standing near the fence with his jacket folded over one arm. He had left his bodyguards outside, or farther away, because for once he looked like only a man and not a don. Tired, unsure, human. In all the ways power usually lets men avoid. I rose slowly and brushed the crumbs from my skirt. "Stay here," I told the children. "I'll be right back." He did not speak until I was close enough to see the shine of tears he had no intention of hiding. "I came to apologize," he said. "You've done that before. Not like this." He glanced toward the children gathered under the tree, and something quiet passed over his face. Maybe he was picturing the life we once thought we would have. Maybe he finally understood that I had built one without him. "I broke every promise I ever made you," he said. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to answer. I just needed to say it without lying to myself again. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I destroyed it with both hands." The honesty in it might have moved me years earlier. Now it only made me sad for a version of us that had died a long time ago. I let him speak because this was not for him alone. It was for the part of me that had once loved him so fiercely I thought there could never be a life beyond that love. Listening without shaking, without breaking, without wanting anything back from him felt like proof of how far I had come. When he finished, the silence between us turned almost gentle. He gave a short, tired laugh. "You know what I kept thinking these last 3 years? That if I found you, if I could just get in front of you, I would know exactly what to say. Turns out there isn't a sentence in the world big enough for what I did." "No," I said, "there isn't." He nodded. That answer did not surprise him. After a moment, he lifted his arms, then stopped halfway. "Can I hug you once? Just once, and I'll go." I stepped back before he finished the question. That was answer enough. Pain flickered across his face, but he did not argue. He lowered his hands and looked at me for a long time. Not greedily, not like a man still claiming a right, but with the quiet focus of someone trying to remember a place he will never enter again. At last he exhaled. "I won't come again," he said. "I should have stayed away the first time you asked." I believed him. "I hope you find some kind of peace," he added. I thought of the years I had spent believing peace was something a man could either give me or take away. Then I thought of Noah flying a kite in the field, of Damien standing in my bakery doorway with coffee and fresh invoices, of the small apartment over the shop where evenings smelled, of bread and rosemary and the sea. "I already did," I said. His mouth trembled. Then he smiled, small and broken and real. "Goodbye, Jana." He turned and walked back toward the road without looking over his shoulder. I stood there until his car pulled away. When I returned to the children, the little girl who had climbed into my lap earlier tugged on my sleeve and asked, "Who was that?" I looked toward the empty gate. "Someone asking for directions," I said. That evening, by the time I got home, Noah was in the kitchen, talking too fast about his day, while Damien stirred chicken soup at the stove and pretended not to smile at every other sentence. There were school books spread over the table, sugar on the counter from the tart shells Noah had tried and failed to help with, and a tray of still warm egg custards cooling by the window. Noah leaned over one and said with great seriousness, "Tomorrow can we do the rabbit-shaped cookies again? Mia liked those best." "Tomorrow," I said, setting down my keys. Damien looked up then, reading my face in the quiet way he always had. He did not ask where I had been emotionally. He only moved a bowl toward my place at the table and said, "Dinner's getting cold." I sat down between them. Birds flashed past the window, and the kitchen was warm with the scent of simmering soup. I looked around at the life I had built with my own hands and felt something steadier than peace. The rest of my life was mine, and I was ready for it. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting stories.